Chelik Yudalet of the Sichos. That's volume 14. Second Sicha for Parshas V'eschanan. Now this Sicha originally is actually a hadron, which is a talk on a siyum of either a Masechta or a siyum, in this case, on the entire Shas. Just for some background, if you look at the end of the Sicha, this Sicha was actually said, it was delivered by the Rabbi, on a Yud Tes Kislev. Yud Tes Kislev, we actually complete, amongst other things, the entire Shas. Because remember, the Alter Rebbe instituted that in every Chabad community worldwide, there should be a chalukah. They should split up, divide up amongst the people, the Shas, the entire Talmud. And this way, in the course of a year, throughout every community, or sometimes even said if you need to, join some communities together, we complete the entire Shas. So obviously the Rebbe was the official Siyum HaShas for all Chabad communities of the entire world. And that would take place on Yud Tes Kislev. Many times the Rebbe made a Siyum on various Masechtas. In this case, it's a Siyum on the very last Masechta in the Shas. And when I say very last Masechta, I mean the very last Masechta on which we have Gemara, because many Masechtas in the Shas, we don't have Gemara, we only have Mishnah. And in this case, as the Rebbe always would do, in a Siyum, always point out the connection of the end and the beginning. The end of the Shas discusses the virtues of studying Torah every day. And the very beginning of the Shas, the very beginning of Talmud, is the first Mishnah that speaks about the reading of the Shema at night. The connection to our Parsha is very obvious. The Shema that we say every day, Shema and V'ahavta, is in our Parsha, in this week's Parsha, in V'eschanan. Now, in Shema, we actually essentially have two mitzvahs. A, the mitzvah of saying Shema, b'shachbecha uvekumecha, in the morning and in the evening. And B, the study of Torah, v'dibarta bam, that we're supposed to teach it to the students, teach it to ourselves, and constantly speak in the words of Torah. So in this Sicha, we're going to actually learn and understand the differences between these two mitzvahs. At the end, the Rebbe will actually even make a connection between the two, because they're obviously connected by virtue of the fact that they're stated together. But still, they are inherently different in what they represent, and that's why the halachas of them, some of the laws, it gets expressed in that too. Let's go for it. Let's try by first reading at least some part inside, and then we will continue by explaining as we do orally. Aleph. Shtei mitzvahs ikriyos mevu'ores v'parshasenu. There are two very fundamental mitzvahs that are stated in our parsha. Number one, mitzvahs kriyas Shema, and number two, mitzvahs Talmud Torah. V'af, and although sheshneim nichtovim b'pasuk echad, they are both written not just in one context, in one parsha, in one pasuk, in the very same pasuk. Upsak dinhu, and it's actually halacha. The b'kriyas meshachis v'arvis mekayim mitzvahs v'hagisa b'yom v'layla. That it's actually even halacha, therefore, that by reading Shema in the morning and in the evening, at least at a minimum, a person also fulfills their basic obligation of studying Torah day and night. That's true. Well, le'idach kisa, however, and on the other hand, Talmud Torah, shinun k'kriyas Shema. Talmud Torah is also something that you need to need to study it, you need to say it, you need to repeat it like Shema, which it needs to be repeated, to repeat the Torah. However, there is a tremendous difference. There's a tremendous disparity between the two. Although there are certain things that uniquely connect them and seem to be, overlap one to the other, but inherently they are two different things. Number one, Hachiyuv the mitzvahs kriyas Shema hu pa'amayim b'chol yom b'shachris v'arvis kimifurish kan b'shach b'cha b'kumecha. The obligation of saying Shema is twice a day, in the morning and in the evening, as stated clearly in this parsha, as we say, b'shach b'cha when you lie down, u'v'kumecha when you rise up. V'kol echad mehem hu inyan b'fnei atzmai. And each one of them is actually an individual, so to speak, an individual mitzvah, an individual concept in itself. Where do you see that? And it was proven by the fact that when we say Shema in the morning, we say Shema in the evening, we say two separate sets of brachas. We don't make bracha once in the day for both Shema's that we're going to make, either let's say at night and say because the day starts at night, or in the morning because the order of the prayers start in the morning. No, each time we say Shema, we say their own brachas. Now, whether the brachas are directly connected to the Shema or not is a separate discussion. But the fact is we say two brachas before Shema, both in the morning and the evening, and then in the morning we say one bracha after Shema, in the evening we say two brachas after Shema before segueing to the Shemona Esrei. So you see that each one is like a thing in itself. It needs its own brachas, like any mitzvah that would need its own bracha. Okay? However, Masha'inke, on the other hand, which is not so, mitzvahs Talmud Torah, eina mechulekes l'chiyuv nifradim mizman hayom v'layla, is not in any way divided into separate obligations, into individual obligations throughout the day or night. Rather, Elohu chiyuv echad hanimshach tamid. The Rebbe emphasizes the word echad. It is one obligation that constantly is on the person's, so to speak, list of obligation for the entirety of the day. Both day and night. And therefore, therefore, we actually make a bracha on the Torah only once a day. Not only somebody who studies the entire day, where then there would be a logic. You make a bracha in the morning, since you're studying all day until such time that you go to sleep, maybe with very small intervals, with absolutely necessary intermissions. So maybe you say, okay, there it's logical because it's considered like one long mitzvah. But we're saying no. Every person makes only one bracha on study of Torah. When? In the morning. Whether or not they're going to learn for the entirety of the day. That means even your average person who only learns liprakim at different various times. He doesn't learn all the time. Maybe a little in the morning, a little at night, or maybe a little in the day. But it's all very, very splintered in terms of time. And yet, we make one bracha. The reason for it? Because the obligation to study Torah is a continuous obligation that has no interruption whatsoever, has no stop whatsoever. Whereas Shema, there is the obligation of the morning, and it ends at a certain time, and then there's the obligation of the evening, which begins and again ends at the end of the night. It begins at the beginning of the night, it ends at the night. So it begins and ends at a certain time. Now, the truth is, one would argue, and this is from one of the footnotes, footnote 7, if that's the case, if the Torah is a constant obligation, why do we make a bracha every day? Well, that we'll soon understand a little better. The fact is that every day is already considered to be a new entity. But in terms of the obligation of the Torah itself versus the obligation of Shema, Shema has separate obligations. There's the morning, there's the night. Whereas Torah is a continuous and a constant obligation. So here's the question. So we need to understand. It needs to be clarified. At first glance, if you look at the idea, the concepts of Shema and Torah, it would seem to be that the exact opposite would make sense. In other words, the rationale should be the exact opposite. Which is, Talmud Torah, think about it. What is the idea of studying Torah? And notice that I said study, not say Torah. Saying Torah in itself is a very little aspect of the mitzvah of Torah. Just repeating words, as the Rebbe points out in a moment, won't even count in most of learning of Torah. What is it? Havana v'hasaga, understanding, conceptualizing it, really intellectually absorbing the Torah. Because the obligation, the fulfillment obligation of studying Torah is to understand, to comprehend what one is learning. And the ruling is that if when it comes at least to Torah Sheba'al Peh, not to words of Torah or, for example, words of Tehillim, but let's say words of Gemara, words of Mishnah. If one doesn't understand what they're saying, if one doesn't comprehend, they haven't fulfilled their obligation. You can say words of Gemara and Mishnah all day. You didn't fulfill the obligation of learning Torah. And therefore, and you therefore do not make a bracha. If one was to make a birchas HaTorah and sit down and start saying words of Torah Sheba'al Peh without having any basic understanding of what they're saying, they've made a bracha levatala. By the way, that's the reason why in the Siddur, when we make a bracha on the Torah in the morning, which we do every morning, immediately what do? In order to fulfill that obligation, we say words of Torah Shebiksav. We say psukim first. Then we go to a Mishnah, but a very simple one. One that anybody can really understand, so we fulfill the obligation. But the point is that the obligation of learning Torah is to understand what one learns. Here's the question. Since when it comes to understanding, there are various times, there are various circumstances, there are various levels of understanding. We're talking about within even the same person. There are times when one's head's working better. It's time when one's, gets things and he has a clarity of the mind, and the times we're not. So svara lekasha mitzvahs talmud Torah legeter hazman v'yischalka shebeneim. So it would be actually logical, there would be a rationale to divide the Torah, to separate it in a difference of times. In other words, we said that Torah is a one continuous obligation. It's one thing. It begins and it goes through the full cycle of the day. There's no interruption. There is. There clearly is a difference. That's number one. Number two, bifrat, and especially, we do actually find, in other words, it's factual, we find in the Talmud, in the Gemara, we find that there is a difference between one's learning by day and one's learning at night. For example, the Gemara brings over there from Abzeda that they asked him, wow, how do you have such a clarity, such sharpness in your learning? He says, because I learned all my Torah by day. The truth is, some of the Mefarsh Rabbi Chanal brings that there were other Talmidei Chachamim that used to sleep by day and learn the entire night. Sounds like teenagers, no. But learn the entire night. What is the idea? For them, learning at night did much better for their learning than for Abzeda. But the point is not when is better or not. The point is that there are differences. Even within the greatest of the Chachamim, they tested to the fact that for them, the learning of the day was better. Or for them, the learning of the night was better. And we have in the Agadah, in the Medrash, that it says clearly, Moshe was in the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights over there. It doesn't get dark. The sun doesn't set. You don't see any. How did he know when is day and when is night? So there were various ways. One of the ways was, it says, when Hashem taught him Mikra, when he taught him Torah Shebiksav, he knew that's day. Then when Hashem will teach him Mishnah, the halacha, or what we know as Torah Sheba'al Peh, then Moshe knew it's night. That was his cue for when it was day or night. So what do you see here? Not only in our terms, meaning in the part of the recipient, is there a difference between one part of the day and another, or the day and the night? In other words, there's an inherent difference. Also in the giving of the Torah. What was Moshe there for? Moshe was there to receive the Torah. And in Hashem giving him the Torah, there was also a difference between day and night. This took place by day, this took place by night. So you see there's a difference. So if anything, in the Torah there should be a difference between day and night, and therefore maybe require various brachas, or various preparations, or prerequisites or something. What is the idea of Kriya Shema? Like the Mishnah says, like the Gemara says, what is the purpose of Kriya Shema? That a person should accept upon him oil malchus shamayim. A person should accept upon himself the sovereignty of Hashem and the unity of Hashem. And that this has to be a constantly on your mind. It has to be constantly remembered, a constant reminder that Hashem is greater, Hashem is one, and so on and so forth. This has to be in every single person all the time. Since remembering Hashem's kingship, Hashem's sovereignty and His unity is a constant obligation, so then it doesn't seem logical, it doesn't seem rational that there should be a difference between the night Shema and the day Shema. One is one thing, one is another thing. L'chayr, it's all the same thing. Now, how would you explain in that case, if you were following this way of thinking, this rationale, why you have to say it twice a day? Maybe just like you need a reminder. Since we're human beings, you need to remind yourself in the morning and remind yourself at night. But the obligation, the idea, the essence of the mitzvah, it's all the time. So why is it that we find that it's the exact opposite? Shema is divided into day and night and has its own brachas, whereas Torah is, so to speak, the entire time. It's one continuous obligation, day and night, throughout the entire 24-hour day period. It only kind of stops and restarts, with a new day, and that is, as we're going to see in a moment, not because of the Torah itself. The next few chapters I'm going to say orally, and you see here tremendous insight in what Shema is all about, what Torah is all about, what it's meant to do for us, what we're meant to do in the world. And here it is. Chapter 2. The life of a person is all one continuous thing, correct? You start your life and you continue living. So it's really, in a sense, one entity. Yet, halachically and conceptually, the life of a person, according to the Torah, is divided into days. For example, even in the words of the Kabbalah, of the Zohar, it says, Kol yoyma v'yoyma oved avidata. Each and every day brings its effect. Even each and every day has its accomplishment. True, it's one component in the person's entire life, but yet each of the day is an individual day. What is a day? A day consists of morning and of day and night. Okay, like it says, Vayi erev, vayi boiker yom echad. This is true according to the Torah. And here is hinted the purpose, the objective of the life of the avodah of a person. The objective of a person is to do what? To make a dira b'tachtoinim. Notice the words. To make a dira for Hashem b'tachtoinim. In other words, the tachton is a true existence, or it exists. The tachton is here. We're not here to destroy the tachton, to eliminate the tachton, thus making room for Hashem. That's not what it says. It says that our objective is that the tachton, as it is a metzius, as it is an existence, to make it that it should become compatible with, it should become a place where Hashem, so to speak, can dwell. The light of Hashem can shine. And this is hinted, and perhaps one of the reasons why Hashem chose to tell us in the creation of the world, Vayi erev, vayi boiker, that it was night, it was day, yom echad. What is hinted in these words? That Hashem, the objective in what he wants from us, in the purpose why he created the world, is to take erev, the darkness, and connect it with boiker, with light, with illuminance, with day, and through that make yom echad, make it the echad, the unity, the oneness of Hashem should shine. That's the word yom. So vayi erev, vayi boiker, yom echad. But the bottom line is that the world exists, just to summarize, and this existence needs to become, although it in itself was created in a way that it really is erev, it's really darkness, but it needs to now become connected with, and it needs to become whole with the yom, the day, the light, the boiker, the shine, and through that it becomes a place for the echad. And that is the avodah of Shema. The avodah of Shema is to do what? For example, when we say the word echad, what are you supposed to have in mind? The Gemara says it clearly. that you're supposed to make Hashem king, Amlichte. You're supposed to, so to speak, appoint him as king, make him king in all directions. And even in the word Echad itself, you have all the directions hinted. You have the Aleph, which is one Hashem. You have the Ches, which is the 7 heavens and 1 earth. And then the Dalet, which is the 4 sides of the world. So that's the Vav Ktzav, the 6 sides. So what is Shema? Shema is about the person bringing godliness into the world. They bringing light into this darkness. Since that is the avodah, and since that is the effect of Shema, in other words, the Shema is supposed to do is not to point out the difference between the two, but rather to tell us that there are 2 things, and it's our job to bring them echad, to bring them together. Therefore, this is expressed in the halachis of Shema, in the practice of Shema, that there are 2 Shmas. There's a Shema of the Laila and there's a Shema of the Yom. There's a Shema of the morning, there's a Shema of the night. However, Torah, we know that the Torah preceded the world. What does it mean the Torah preceded the world? Torah is beyond world. Torah does not get manipulated by world. Torah is not here to create anything in the world. If anything, Torah reveals what's there in the world. But Torah is beyond the world. For example, like the Chazal say that the words of Hashem, what does it mean? Haloi koid vorai ka'esh. Hashem says, behold, my words are like fire. What does it mean like words like fire? In other words, what's the comparison to fire? So the Gemara says, just like fire is not mekabel tuma, water can become tameh. An object can become tameh. Fire is not something tangible enough to become tameh. The same way that fire doesn't become tameh, so too the words of Torah also do not become tameh. And ultimately, that even makes the halacha, makes for the room for the halacha, why even somebody who's tameh is allowed to learn Torah. Thus, Torah is beyond any whatsoever difference and separation of night, day, light, darkness, and so on. And it's not just about bringing the 2 together. It's about the Torah, how it's higher than the world. In fact, when a person learns Torah, he elevates himself from the world. Therefore, there's no difference in the halachas of Torah. That was chapter 2. Chapter 3, the Rebbe takes it a step further. And if I may suggest, the Rebbe is, so to speak, now focusing on the person. We spoke about the concept of Shema and the concept of Torah. Now the Rebbe goes into what is the person's, so to speak, participation in this. Since the person, here's chapter 3, since the person's objective in saying Shema is to influence a unity, to impact the unity in the world, not just to reveal it, but to actually, so to speak, force it onto the world, make the world a place that accepts Hashem's sovereignty, make the world a place that becomes subservient to Hashem. So it's dependent on the person. A human being has ups and downs. A human being has achievement, but then later he can go higher. When a person goes higher, compared to the higher level, the lower level is already considered a darkness. Meaning, the higher of appreciation you have of light, the more when you look back, you see darkness. Because compared to the new light, that was insignificant. Therefore, that was dark. Thus, what the Torah is telling us is when you say Shema, when you're affecting the world, you, the person, you're affecting the world, you should know and always constantly be aware that there is an Erev and that there is a Boker. There is a day, there is a night. Within the day itself, this is not a negative, so to speak, feeling. This is not something that's supposed to make a person depressed. On the contrary, it's a motivating factor that even when I am in full accomplishment and I have done my job and I have affected the world in a way that what? That the world is seeing the light, in a sense. The world is accepting Hashem. The world is becoming a place for Hashem. But I have to recognize that soon I'm going to affect the world even more. Next time around, the next phase, which is very soon, it can be the next Shema, it can be within the same day. I am going to now go take it to the next level, and to the next level, and to the next level. And therefore there is constantly this day and night idea day and night object, so to speak, that even while I have the day, even while I'm accomplishing, I still already am aware. In the moment, so to speak, of satisfaction, in the moment of glory, of accomplishment, I already am aware and I know, and I'm being reminded by the Torah through this concept of day and night, that that is night. How is that night? How is that so bad? Because compared to the next level, this is night. Compared to the next level, this is not enough. And that's why in Shema it's inherent the difference between day and night. However, Torah, according to Torah, the world doesn't exist. According to Torah, the world makes absolutely no difference. If anything, I have to leave the world and constantly elevate myself and go towards Torah. I have to, so to speak, just reveal the good that's there. I don't have to make anything. I don't have to accomplish anything. And therefore, it's really, if you think about it, there's no darkness. It's constantly going from one level of light to another, to another, to another, to another, which is just a constant process of revelation, revealing what's there already. Actually, I have to make a mistake. I made a mistake. This chapter actually focuses on the aspect of what's happening in the world in terms of the Shema and the Torah. Chapter 4 says there's also another difference. It's taking it another step. And this one is focusing on the person who is saying Shema or the individual who's learning Torah. You see, in a person's life, there are ups and downs. Nobody is the same all the time. As, for example, and don't feel bad, it's not just you and me, the biggest tzaddik in the world. What does it say? Sheva yipol tzaddik v'kom. That even a tzaddik has 7 times that the tzaddik falls, whatever it means, seven levels, whatever it means. But the fact is that even a tzaddik, who we know, and especially according to Tanya, is on the highest level, is the most complete that there possibly can be, and yet the tzaddik can fall. So when a person's avodah, you have better days, you have worse days. You have better moments within the same days, within the same davening even, compared to the other moments. One, perhaps, would maybe be of the mindset that, look, when I feel light, when I feel good, when I feel yom, that's when I'm energized. That's when not only I'm energized and I have desire, that's when I'll be effective. But if it's erev, if it's night, if it's dark, and I'm not feeling up to it, and I'm not feeling what I felt before, maybe it's not a time to do my avodah. Maybe it's not a time to affect the world because I won't be effective. That's the message of Shema. You need to affect the world. And that is a reality within the world, that there is Yom and there is Laila. There is day, there is night, there is dark, there is light. And therefore, your avodah has to always be there. You have to always be trying and making the effort to affect the world, even when it's Erev. And that's why it's inherent in Shema that there is a day and there is a night. The Torah, however, is beyond that. The Torah is not influenced by the differences of day and night, of darkness, of light. The Torah is constantly always there. The Torah is constantly above and beyond the world. However, how does one get the koyach the koyach? Where does one get this ability, this energy, so to speak, this spiritual energy, to take a moment of darkness, a moment of Erev, and even then affect the world? That explains the connection between Shema and Torah. And that explains why, even though they're so different, as we just finished explaining, why the Torah jams in the idea of learning Torah together with Shema. Because it's the Torah aspect that's in the Shema that helps us rise above even those dark moments, even the Erev. And this brings us to chapter 5, where the Rebbe says, look how beautiful it is. Now we can understand the absolute connection between the beginning of Shas and the end of Shas. The very first mitzvah in the entire Talmud is what? Reading Shema. Not just any Shema, but the Shema of the evening. It starts with, when do you read Shema in the evening, in the dark? How can one effectively do his avodah, affect the world through all that challenge of darkness? The answer is all the way at the end. Kol hashayna halachas b'chol yom muftach lo yishu ben olam haba. One who studies halachas every day, which is the ultimate in the Torah, because the Rebbe explains how halacha is the ultimate level of Torah. Why is it the ultimate level of Torah? Because there's unity in halacha. You see, when you learn Torah Shebal Peh, especially, in a discussion phase, there's always a back and forth. There are differences of opinions. There's debate. There's one opinion holds this way, one that way. They seem to be splintered, even though they're both Torah, and that's a whole discussion in itself. But when it comes to the halacha phase, when there's a unification, and like in a sense, all minds come together, that is the ultimate study of Torah, and that is where we get the power to be able to do what it says in the beginning of the Shas, Kol hashayna halachis v'chol yoim muftach loy shehu ben olam haba. And I'm sorry, what it says in the beginning of the Shas, that me'emes ha'koyrin neshma ba'arvin, that even in the Erev, this Vayi Erev, Vayi Boiker, even in the evening, in the dark moments, you still are able to affect the world.